Thanks for watching this movie review video. This is for the 1982 film Eating Raoul. Now, I know some people may be saying, isn't that a comedy? And yes, it is, but it's actually categorized as comedy and crime. And if you really look at the film, the crime is pretty horrific. It's very much a dark comedy. And I would argue that if you just make this film a little differently, like if someone wanted to update this film for right now, they could take the exact same script, put different music to it, have the performances from the actors be a little bit different, and you could still have the comedy to it, but it could be way more horror because the actual subject matter of what's going on is pretty horrific. I mean, it's a couple offing people for money and then disposing of their bodies by having it ground into dog food. And then at the very end, as the title says, Eating Raoul, they're literally cooking and eating someone and then starting a restaurant, which it's implying that they may also be serving other people at the restaurant. Because at this point, why would they quit what they're doing? So I'm arguing this fits into horror. This straight up fits into horror, but it is funny as well and is definitely a comedy. And it was primarily made to be that way, in my opinion, but much like with horror in general, horror finds its way, even in small parts, into a lot of different genres of film. So, you can see a straight up, comedy or a straight up rom-com or romance or drama or whatever. And there can still be horror elements in there. Now, this one I'm arguing is even bigger, but yeah. So anyway, I'm reviewing Eating Raoul, which is a fun film. Directed by Paul Bartel, who also directed Death Race 2000, which is in my stack over here. I will be watching that sometime within the next month or so and reviewing it. Love that film. Also did Cannonball, Lust in the Dust, and Private Parts. Not the Howard Stern Private Parts, a different older one. This was written by Bartel and Richard Blackburn, and Richard Blackburn had written scripts for Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, and did an episode of Tales from the Dark Side, if people remember that show. It was a good show. The film was so low budget that they shot it on loose ends, which if people don't know what loose ends are, it's basically like discarded, unused endings of film that other people just did not use. So they literally got all these loose ends, put them together, and made their film off of that. Also, the film altogether only ended up taking actually 22 days of shooting, but they shot it over the span of an entire year because it was so low budget. Basically, Bartel had to wait until he had money coming in to actually shoot scenes. So, yeah, that's why it took so long. So, truly a very independent film. A sequel to this film was supposedly planned with Chevy Chase playing the part of a person who found out the secret of the Blands and started blackmailing them. But unfortunately, Bartel passed away before this could come to fruition, and then it just kind of ended up getting scrapped after that. But after seeing this, it makes me wonder, what would that sequel have been like? Probably could have been pretty good. As we all know, Chevy Chase does an amazing job. I hear he's a terrible person, but he does an outstanding job acting-wise. Paul Reubens was reportedly offered the role of the sex shop salesman in this, which I'm going to be honest, I think that's my favorite scene within this film, and it would have been even more fun to have Paul Reubens in it. Now, apparently he was like, no, I really don't want to do that, but he suggested to Bartel the person who ended up playing the sex shop salesman in it, and I think that person did a good job, so yeah, it was fun. I'll comment on that a little bit later. The setup to this film has a social panic about perverts, which sets it up as kind of ridiculous. It's delivered in kind of like an over-the-top, zany, ridiculous ways to let you know that this is a comedic tone and meant to be very hyperbolic, very over-the-top. So that makes sense. And it also just injects it immediately with this kind of like light funness to the film. But it also lets you know, like, it's a ridiculous commentary kind of about how society looks at people who are sexually liberated as like scum, in essence, as like perverts. And you see that also in the fact that, Mary and Paul end up treating these people like they're not even really humans, like they don't even have a right to live because they're doing things that they deem to be like dirty, in essence. And they even make a comment at one point about like cleaning up society, in a sense, by offing these people and taking their money because they're, into orgies and swinging and whatever. And obviously they're betrayed to a very ridiculous degree as being into all sorts of kinks that a lot of them don't even exist. Well, I mean, there's probably a kink for pretty much everything in my opinion, but I will say a disclaimer, my personal opinion on stuff of a sexual nature and kinks and stuff, I actually adopt the motto of people in the kink community, which is don't yuck my yum. Like if someone's into it and it's, it's only people who are consenting adults who are involved in that, go for it. Like do what you want. That is totally fine. The wine situation with Paul quickly establishes him as a snob. That is who his character was supposed to be, very, very snobbish. Thinking of himself as super high class, even though they have credit cards that they can't use anymore because they're so financially underwater. But here he is buying all these very expensive bottles of wine by the case because one day he's going to have them for their restaurant, which they cannot afford to establish. Yet he's got all these very expensive wines already, and they can't even afford it, basically. And that's why at some point Mary basically says, we're going to have to sell some of this wine. But then obviously that doesn't go well because he gets screwed over on that. Mary's enema joke with her patient, that whole situation and her whole introduction sets her up as a big time like ball buster type, which plays then later into the character and the believability of her becoming this dominatrix type character. So the trappings of who these people are set up immediately in their introductory scenes, and I think they're done well. It's a quick way to establish both of them, and it's done in funny ways, in my opinion. So I enjoy both the ways that they're set up. The financial woes that Paul and Mary talk about establish a desperate situation and end up becoming the justification that the audience can understand for when they start doing very rash things later. They have these hopes and dreams. They're looking at people who happen to have all this money and they're saying, why can't we just take that? And then they just justify it to themselves. Well, they're into kinky things. They're into perverted stuff. So it wouldn't be that big of a deal if we just offed them because society doesn't like them anyway. They just view them as perverts, right? That's how they think. I love how Paul gets a call from someone wanting to buy his Chateau Lafite wine, and he won't sell when he's having severe financial troubles. This shows you how committed he is to being this person and living his life like this and thinking that everything is going to end up being fine and he will need these very expensive wines later on. It seems it's more to him about feeling upper class than actually being upper class. And I think that's a big aspect of this film, of looking at Paul and Mary and basically saying they are like, in a sense, in a very small sense, they are like your typical person in the United States who wants so badly to be rich, who wants so badly to be financially secure, to be successful. But the reality of the situation is they're not. But in a mental capacity, that's where they are with themselves. And they kind of treat their lives that way while denying the fact that they can't even afford to do that. And that does happen a lot. I mean, so many people are in extreme debt within the United States in particular. I'm sure other countries as well, just because of that whole thing. And it goes back to the whole consumerism bent that started decades and decades and decades ago, where it's, you deserve this, buy what you want, everyone can be successful, like it's the American dream, and it's just very hard for people to actually get to that, and it very seldom people actually do get there. Paul and Mary don't seem too concerned about the swinger being dead in the first place, the first person they end up killing, which, by the way, the frying pan being the weapon, or the skillet is what they call it. It looks like a cast iron pan, but the skillet ends up being the killing weapon every single time. And it's kind of funny. Apparently what they did, like when they were foleying the film, is the noise of the person getting whacked on the head was actually them taking that skillet and whacking it on a cantaloupe. So there you go. But yeah, they don't seem that concerned with killing someone. So right out of the gate, they are predisposed to being serial killers because they don't freak out or anything when they kill this first guy. It's just like, well, how do we get rid of the body now? You know, like there's no moment of panic, there's no moment of concern, there's no moment of feeling sick about what they just did. They're immediately psychopathic, basically. Here's a good quote. "He was a man, honey. Now he's just a bag of garbage." And that goes very well with the visual that you end up showing of how Mary had already stuffed this guy into a garbage bag, just basically like, it's showing how she was viewing him as when he was alive, he was a person. And then as soon as there's no life left in him, he's just garbage. You know, we're just going to get rid of him. And that's how they're viewing everyone they were offing. Mr. Leach, the guy at the bank, really just threw everything out there with how extremely forward he was trying to get in Mary's pants. Also, he's obviously named for his profession of leeching off of people. That's my guarantee, is that that's the reason for his name. Because if you look at Paul and Mary, they were obviously named Bland as a joke to kind of be like, look, they want to open a restaurant, which is obviously focused on food, but they are bland. I think it may also have been potentially a reference to them being a little bit of like a run-of-the-mill person in society. They're just a bland person. Paul and Mary start to see themselves as vigilantes by cleaning up all the sex-crazed perverts in town. I kind of already talked about that, but it's just kind of funny that that's the way they go with it. And for that reason, I do think for its time, this was a pretty unique film. So I think it's one definitely worth watching for that reason. Doris the Dominatrix being a jovial homemaker is a very fun juxtaposition. That's obviously a joke that's baked into this film, which there are a lot of them. But I think that's a pretty funny one because the preconceived notions, especially in 1982, that people have about individuals involved in something like being a dominatrix, so different. Like people just think that because someone's into something weird sexually, that there's no way they can have like a normal life. And here they're showing it like she's just this jovial homemaker, like I said. Like, so it's kind of a funny joke though. Why don't they kill the people right after they show up? Like when they're doing their whole grift now of, well, it's even worse than a grift, but when they're doing their whole thing of, you know, placing this ad, which apparently they didn't have the money to like create a fake ad for this, so they put a real ad in the paper that was accepted. So what you're seeing in the film was actually run in a paper, apparently. Supposedly, that's what I read online. But anyway, so it didn't make sense to me why when the customers come over, they went through a bunch of like the role play and then killed them, as opposed to like as soon as they show up, don't even take the time of getting into the whole role play and everything. Just kill them, because you're going to kill them at some point. Why not cut out a bunch of the work that's needed here? And you see it with Mary. Like she comments a lot of times like, oh man, I hate doing this, or you know, that went on for so long, or it was just, you know, this costume's so hot, you know, stuff like that. And it's just like, you could have just killed him like immediately, and then you don't have to go through all that. So, I don't know. Either way, you're getting the same amount of money from them. You're taking whatever they brought. So you don't need to go through all the dominatrix stuff. I don't know. Raoul gets it right. The murdering is a lot of work for not much money. Raoul says what the audience is thinking at that point when he tells them this, after he's broken into their house and is confronted. He's like, you're killing these people and trying to get rid of their bodies just to take like a few $100. Like that's not a whole lot for what you're doing, basically. And he's totally right. So then obviously it becomes a very good idea for them once he pitches them on the idea of taking the bodies for them. I mean, how unbelievably nice and convenient that is. And then I kind of thought that the way they were going to go with it is that he was giving it to someone who was then cooking the people at some sort of restaurant. But then you eventually find out it's actually going into dog food, so kind of less likely to be found out in that sense. Because, I mean, I'm sure even then there was some sort of inspection at animal food processing plants, but I don't think it's the same degree as at restaurants. The arrangement with Raoul does make things a lot easier for Paul and Mary. Yeah, I just said that, sorry. I like how what bothers Mary is cooking with the murder weapon skillet. That's the only time she has any sort of concern related to the killings, is can you get a new skillet for us because I don't want to cook with the skillet we're killing people with? And you're just like, okay. But and it means that that's the idea of it for her. Like, it's reminding her of that stuff, because it's not like there's anything getting inside the skillet, because it's always, people are always being hit with the bottom of it. Plus, there's never any blood in this. That's another thing. If you shot this film to show the gore, to show blood of people being bludgeoned to death, like, it's still the same story. It's just they decided to show more. So it goes back to my argument about this is horror. This is a horror story. Mary is more concerned with boning Raoul than killing people. Yeah, she really does get more to the focusing so much on having sex with Raoul, which in the beginning you get the idea she's such a prude, and you feel like her character progresses to a point where her morality starts to loosen. And it's funny that she goes to killing someone before she gets a little more sexually liberated. And she talks so terribly about people who are into swingers parties and being dominatrix and anything like that. Yet she's going to murder people, and then she's going to do the same thing that she's chiding these people for in order to lure people over to murder. So it's just like, the morality is all crazy in this. And, you know, that's obviously the point. The sex shop scene is probably my favorite. Super funny. I already said that, but it bears repeating. It's very, very funny. A lot of good jokes baked into that scene. The bodies going into the dog food is not where I thought it was going. Probably less likely to be found that way. I already said that as well. I like how Mary can tell what drug Raoul is taking just by tasting it. That's another subtle joke in the film where he's taking the pills that are going to make him impotent, obviously, because of the whole plan that Paul ended up having with Doris the dominatrix to act as a nurse going door to door about venereal diseases. And then she gives him these pills, and they're making him get a hard off. And she's like, what are you taking? And then she literally bites it, and she's like, oh, and she can pick it out immediately. So I thought that was kind of funny, because obviously it's ridiculous. The naked woman in the shower of Mr. Leach's bathroom when Mary's in there and she offs him would have known what was going on. I mean, she would have, A, heard what was happening, all the commotion and the fact that Mary was killing Mr. Leach, or ended up killing Mr. Leach after he tried to assault her. And the other thing is, she was behind, I know it was like wavy glass, but she's behind glass, so she could at least see shapes. She could see the scuffling happen, and she could see the fact that she would be like boosting his body out of the house. So that scene doesn't play so great, in my opinion. The heater in the hot tub kill scene is a very efficient way to increase your income really, really fast. That was meant to be very over the top and ridiculous and funny, and it was. Like, they literally just take the heater, throw it into the hot tub with all these rich people, and then are just like, okay, that was not a whole lot of work to take these people out. And then they start selling all their stuff. They bring people in to take their cars away. They take their clothes. They take their jewelry, their money, all that stuff. And then I guess they have that house then at that point too. So what are they going to do with the house? Unless I missed it and they did do something. I don't think so, though. It's odd that Paul isn't mad at all at Mary in the end, that he was cheating on her, because he seemed concerned about it, obviously. So much so to come up with those crazy plans with Doris, the dominatrix, which I assume he was, I mean, I'm pretty sure he was paying her to do those things. But it's just weird because he's not mad at her, but I guess it's probably two things. Like, one, he still loves her so much, so he's just relieved that Raoul is gone, so she's not cheating on him. And two, at this point, they're partners in crime, literally. So if one of them talks, the other one is screwed. So they kind of have to stay together. Like, they really do. So it's also just in his benefit to not alienate her in any way. Otherwise, you know, she could just go to the police and blame it all on him and get him locked up. Or if they happen to be found out, kind of blame it all on him. The very end scene becomes the title, which I thought was kind of cool. None of it is gruesome, but rather implies what's going on. Where I believe it's a real estate agent comes over for the meal, and they are implying that they have cooked Raoul up, and that's who's being eaten. So I assume they're also eating him. Now, I like the idea of naming the film Eating Raoul, because the whole time as the audience, you're just kind of like, okay, there's Raoul. How do we get to him being eaten? And in what way? And what are the events leading to this? And then that's all revealed. And then at the very end, it's like, see, Eating Raoul. And then it's like done. So I kind of like that. I think it was fun. Initially, when I'm watching the film, I was kind of like, why are they calling this Eating Raoul? Maybe they should have called this something else. But by the time you get to the end and you have that final scene that implies what it is, and then it even goes further and it shows the picture of them having opened this restaurant, you're like, ah, yes, I see. So, I mean, it set it up for the second film to be even more sinister in what's going on. Too bad it didn't get made. Obviously, it's a joke that Paul and Mary are named the Blands when they want to open a restaurant. Yes. This seems to poke fun at people who think they're too prim and proper to be sexually liberated. Paul and Mary would rather murder people for their money rather than get the same amount of money for sex work. That's another point to this. Like, literally, they could have actually just been doing the dominatrix gig and getting that money. The money that people, like, they were setting their own price. So they didn't even need to be killing people all along. So it leads you to the conclusion that maybe they just enjoyed that to some degree, because literally they were still doing a bunch of the role playing. All you needed to do was just keep doing the role playing and charge them whatever they were bringing, and you're still making the money and you're not killing anyone. So I think that's kind of part of what's funny about it, is how over the top they are and how they really just want to get to the murdering for the most part. Like, they love it. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Eating Raoul, and I like the film. So out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm giving it a very solid 3.5-star rating. I do think this is a film that people should see because it's funny and it's got some pretty crazy horrific stuff in it too. Even though it's not shot that way, it's not that feel to it. But I would love to hear other people's opinions on Eating Raoul. Go ahead and put it in the comments. Love it, hate it, in between. And give me like a sentence or two letting me know what you do or do not like about it. So, do me a quick favor. Hit subscribe if you haven't already for my channel. That's your best way to repay me. If you like this video or any video I've ever done, at this point when I'm doing these, I'm not making money doing this at all. So it's a hobby thing. Maybe at some point I could, but at the moment, you know, I'm spending a lot of time just doing this. So the best way to repay me, subscribe. Also, hit the notification bell button because then you know when I'm putting up my new videos, which I'm doing 4 a week, which I think is a good amount. But regardless, I really do thank you for taking your time to watch this particular video. And until next time, keep it brutal.